Hi, Tom. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Jim.
And Kimberly. Welcome, Kimberly. I won't be able to call on you today, but I'm glad you're on. You can listen, and then if anything later, can report to me later. But Kimberly, good to have you on. Well, it is 4:46. I will call the meeting of the Community Resources and Tourism Committee, July 13th at 4:45 to order. Before the roll call, please, we're missing Gary Bjork, correct, Michelle?
Yes, I have everybody except Supervisor Bjork.
Thank you. Before I ask for the approval of the minutes, let me just say to the public that are listening, during our Zoom meetings, we do not call on you, but we're glad you are in and listening to us. And if there are things or suggestions or comments you make or have, would you please email me or let me know? I know some people from some of our, what we call our ISPs are listening in on the board, those people that are interested in broadband, and some of them are listening in today too, but I will not be calling on them. But rather, I think it's very important that they are online today because a lot of the discussion today is going to be on broadband. And so with that bit of information, I'll ask if you've had a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting. And if so, I will ask for approval of the minutes from our June meeting.
So I move to approve the minutes as is. Jim Zons.
Jim Zons approved.
Second, Tom Quinn.
Tom Quinn moved approved. So the motions to approve the minutes from our June meeting. Any questions, discussion, or anything else? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. Okay, at this time, I'm going to call on Michelle because ordinarily we have a report from our Area Extension Director, Catherine Emanuel. Catherine and I have been in contact quite a bit lately, and she's on, would you call it a furlough, Michelle, or a vacation, whatever. So she sent a report, and I'm going to ask Michelle if she would read or give us the report today from our Area Extension Director, Catherine Emanuel.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. Yeah, so Catherine is out on both vacations and furlough this week. So I have her report for her. I did email it out this morning as well. Catherine did just want to mention that in the June monthly highlight, there are some things she just wanted to touch on but didn't want to go in depth on. But there is the information on how Extension is dealing with the COVID-19 operational impact for programming and office operations. Conversations that are being had around race and racism and how Extension professionals reflect and act in our educational efforts. Information on how the state employees did take their second furlough day this month. And then the interim UW system president, Catherine does have some information in her highlights about who that is now. What she did want me to go over in a little bit more detail is information about the vacant position we have currently, the community development educator. So due to the COVID-related state hiring freeze, there is that vacant position still. That position is co-funded with Chippewa, Dunn, and Eau Claire counties, and it is a significant value without the investment of having a full-time position. Support has been secured from the UW-Madison Division of Extension and Community Development Institute to fill the position upon the lifting of the statewide hiring freeze and pending county support through the 2021 budget process. This does not automatically happen to every vacant position, but the state sees the value and merit to continue to invest in this position in the shared educator model between 3 counties. Because the position has not been removed, the position has remained in the 2021 budget proposal. And Catherine is working with Extension State content experts on the scope of the position to best match the needs of the 3 counties. One aspect the community development educator can work on is including in their position the rural broadband educational efforts. COVID-19 has exacerbated the digital divide, including teleworking and online schooling across the age range. So Catherine and Supervisor Anderson did have a phone call recently where he shared his concerns for broadband in Dunn County and asked if Extension could take a look at how and if they could play a role in broadband efforts. The community development educator is that discipline that would be directly linked to broadband. The position itself is not focused on broadband, but can encompass those efforts. And then additionally, Catherine would like to remind about the area committee meetings that will be happening on September 1st from 1 to 2:30 as an online meeting. This is a time for Extension educators and members of the Extension Oversight Committees for Dunn, Eau Claire, and Chippewa counties all to meet together and build a relationship as an area and get to know each other. There will not be legislative items at the meeting, but it will be a publicly noticed meeting since there may be a quorum for each committee. And then there was an updated save the date in your email today, as the first one had a slight typo. Is there any questions that any committee member has for me on Catherine's report?
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. As Michelle said, I did reach out to Catherine Emanuel regarding that position here in Dunn County with the direction of this committee and our county board chair and our county manager. We are taking a hard look at broadband, and I asked if maybe some of the leadership could come back. Do you remember back when we started much of this work? We had our 4-H agent was working with Jason, and more recently Stephanie Hitz, who helped a great deal with the mapping, and working with Dunn County EDC as well as Bob Colson, and that made up our team. Now, of course, things have changed pretty dramatically. So I just thought we needed to reach out to see if Extension might be able to pick up some of that and help us out with this in the future. And all I did was explore it with Catherine, and we'll keep you informed and see where you want to go on that in the future. Any other questions of Michelle? Thank you very much, Michelle. Well, as you know, we always get a good update on our Dunn County Economic Development Corporation and what's happening, and I'm delighted again to be able to have Stacy here to update you on what they're doing at Dunn County EDC. It's been a lot, and so Stacy, why don't you bring the committee update here of what's been happening in your area?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I'm a ways from my screen, which means I'm a ways from my microphone, I think, but I'll try to speak up. Lots of usual things happen in economic development here. No surprises and nothing earth-shattering. Still dealing with COVID and all of the meetings and webinars. But I'm just going to run down through a list of kind of the activities I've been involved in since we met last with this group. I've been involved in several board meetings with Momentum West has had one, not in July, back in June. Since our last meeting, the Greater Menominee Development Corp. I was in on that annual board meeting. First time with that group, very informative, great group. Of course, the Dunn County Economic Development Corp. Had a meeting right after this group's last meeting, and we have another one on this coming Wednesday. And I was able to sit in on a board meeting for with the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. That's a great group from around the area. High level talks about economic development, learned a lot. Webinars are continuing through the COVID. Webinars on everything. And this is a small list and topics covering broadband, fundings, grants, and loans. Again, the Small Business Administration is putting them on. Wisconsin Economic Development Association, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation with their Focus Forward live streams. Wisconsin Manufacturing and Commerce sponsors quite a few. In fact, I can't remember if they were the ones that sponsored the one that Ron Kind presented at, but somebody sponsored that. Listening to Ron was very educational. The Regional Leadership Council with the CEO Leadership Series is once a month, I believe. Chambers of Commerce, both Eau Claire's, Chippewa's, Dunn's, gotten in on some out of the west side of the state too, are putting on webs, as is the Golden Shovel Agency, which is our web page manager. Lots of interesting topics under their guidance and leadership. I continue to meet every Friday except July 3rd with the Dunn County Economic Recovery Team. Actually, that's the Dunn County Community Recovery Team, and meeting about recovering from the COVID crisis. Great group meeting there, lots of heads going together and solving some issues. I've had several meetings with the Regional Business Fund and the Dunn County Loan Committee part of that. We had a meeting with an outfit called the 12AX7 Logic. Eric had apparently done a lot of work with them in the past about entrepreneur attraction and retention, workforce attraction and retention, among a lot of other goals that they had set up that I'm just starting to learn about. A lot of computer applications within that, access to what a great place this is to live for people that might be traveling through. Wisconsin Eye sessions, including the Morning Minute. If you're not in on those are always interesting. I'm continuing to work on that project that I mentioned, trying to get something up in the airport TV with a VCR type thing, that DVD player that will show any visitors what's going on. What I'm kind of waiting for at this point, by the way, that's a cooperation between the downtown Menominee as well as the Menominee Chamber, and now even the Greater Menominee Development Corp, because they're spending some money on what's going to turn out to be an awesome video, which might be what gets shown out there, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel or buy another product. So kind of waiting on that. We've rebroadcasted many notices and press releases. You probably see those with the Dunn County Economic Development Corp banner on it. Just a reminder, I think last time we still talked about it, but we have canceled the annual meeting plans for the Economic Development Corporation. We had talked about possibly doing it virtually. There didn't seem to be a great deal of interest in that. So what I'm trying to hang on to is the possibility that we might have a virtual presentation by a speaker and try to get that same speaker, the state leader of the rural broadband, and present something this fall, possibly. Other contacts that I've had is a couple of different Chippewa Valley developers that I've had conversations with. One is working on the medicine shop moving site, as well as what was going to be a Napa store right next to that isn't happening. So that land's available. There's some a developer looking at putting some storage sheds in the north side of town, just north of the freeway, as well as some other smaller projects. Met with Deb Leslie, the CEO of the Workforce Development. They have a great deal of wonderful office space out there. Facade loan program discussions with a couple of other businesses, one in Colfax and one in Menominee. I met with a few times with Lynn Hansen from the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission.
Lynn Nelson.
I'm sorry, Lynn Nelson.
Right.
Yep, Lynn Nelson, yes. Relative to the Colfax Rail Spur, and had Gary Steen in on that with us, and she passed along a lot of interesting information to us, including some possible funding sources. Was able to get to Chippewa for a live in-person award presentation from WEDA, the Wisconsin Economic Development Association, to Representative Rob Sommerfeld. It was just great to be having lunch with live people. the first one in a while. I met with Dixie and Chad from Spectrum about rural broadband. Talked to Kent from Barron Telephone about that they're coming into the top part of the Dunn County, and that includes the permitting part of that then that you're probably going to talk about later. Got a call about some NAP commercial space being available. I've got a call in there and waiting for a call back. Been answering a lot of questions on who's digging where and what's going where. Dozens of contacts with business owners about sites and spaces and opportunities. And then just today, Red, the chair has this. If you want this article, you can ask me or the chair. A rural tourism article that mentions Govins Farms just came out of the first posted in the Milwaukee Journal, and the Green Bay Gazette picked it up. But it's fun to read newspapers from other parts of the state that mention local businesses. So that's in a pretty quick hurry is what I've been busy with in the last month. Any questions?
Thank you, Stacy. I might just add a comment, and then if you have any questions of Stacy, bring it up. You know that Stacy was hired as an interim executive director on April 1st. And he was hired from our board then to work the first 3 months. And it was obvious that at the end of that time, going back to our board again, that we still could not afford or had not been able to post the position of a full-time. Many things need to be cleared up first. So the board authorized me to negotiate again, and we did extend Stacy's contract as the interim through June 30th, and then it actually goes through the end of the year, feeling as though we're not going to be in a position really to know for sure what Dunn County Economic Development will have for a budget, money, what we can offer. And so I'm just making a brief explanation to all of you that very likely, and I'm happy to say this, really happy, that it appears that I'm hoping that Stacy will continue and be on with us as the interim executive director through the end of this year. Of course, that's the end of my term as president of the Dunn County Economic Development too. And then it will be probably Gary Steen, who is the vice president now as the new president. And thank you, Stacy. We did cancel our annual meeting. Regretfully, we had it set up twice, 3 times. We were going to have the state broadband director here as our keynote speaker. We were going to recognize Eric Turner. We were going to be able to bring in at that time and be able to talk about all the great things Dunn County's doing in broadband. Obviously, we had to cancel it. So as Stacy said, meanwhile, we're looking at some other things that might just be with what we call our ISPs, and maybe still bring the broadband director up here. We would love to bring that person. Remember when we had Angie Dickinson here a few years ago? And that was great. That we had just gotten and looking for certification. And so that's my fault. Stacy, thank you very much. Any questions of our executive director of Dunn County EDC? Okay, we'll move on again to the next item. And here's where we're going to start talking about broadband forward and where we're up. So a lot going on here. Bob Colson, I'm going to turn it over to you now to update us on where we're going in broadband here in Dunn County. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Crank the volume up for me.
Can you hear me?
Now.
Yes?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And I'm on the phone. I can see you guys, but the chair asked that I talk all things broadband, and I guess I would like to go back to last month's meeting when there was a discussion on broadband, and there was a lot of questions about the need for broadband and maybe more of a plan or some background as to what it is broadband is about. And so after that meeting, the chair reached out to me and asked if I would put together or work with him on some broadband overview and milestones, the document that was presented to you guys in your packet. And so it starts, with a timeline back in March 16. And I'm not going to go all the way through everything, but I'll certainly answer questions about the timeline as we go through it. But back in 2016 is kind of when we really kind of started with broadband. And the timeline goes up to, at least in your packet, June 1 of 2020, when we had submitted the application to be a broadband forward certified community. And at the time that this document was released, we hadn't heard back from the PSC, the Public Service Commission. On July 10, I got notice from the PSC that indeed Dunn County has been awarded it's the certification to be broadband forward, and so that's some good news.
So that's official, Bob.
That is official.
Okay.
So from the Public Service Commission, I have since I haven't had a chance to meet with PR&D, but I did put in my monthly report just a blurb that we're broadband forward certified, and I've also contacted the Highway Department because it does impact their work as well, so that the highway is also aware of the certification as we move forward. A couple of things that are in the document that went out with your packet. Talked a little bit about the ISPs, the Internet Service Providers, and the work that they've been doing in the county. And Dunn County has been actually very lucky to get as much broadband monies from the state as we have. We've been awarded 6 of those grants, and that doesn't maybe sound like a lot, but that's really quite a bit for one community or one county to receive. $1.3 million, and they've increased service to over 645 homes and businesses, and they use that money to help defray, or the grant money to help defray their costs for installing it. The other thing that was in the document that you have is kind of an overview or summary of COVID-19 and the impacts that COVID-19 has had, at least to our community, as it relates to broadband. And so when the safe at home orders came, things really dramatically changed in Dunn County, and a lot of people simply had to go home, and those that had access could and their employers had the wherewithal to have them work at home, could work at home. But there's a lot of people, and we knew this, but there's a lot of people in Dunn County that are without access, or without the kind of access that they need in order to work from home. And I just bring your attention to one area that surrounds the city of Menominee, and there are maybe some new members on the committee that maybe weren't around when we did this study, but that's an area that extends upwards around 6 miles outside of the city, and there's over 2,500 addresses in that area alone without any service, not without what's defined as service. And we call that area the donut. And so I just give you that just for background information. And then there's a summary conclusion where the Dunn County has been doing a lot with broadband, and but maybe the county could do more. And so one of the things that it's on later in the agenda is a discussion about maybe the county could create a broadband program and earmark some funds that could be used towards the grants or for other things that are broadband related. And some of the stipulations, if there was a program, and these details could be worked out well in advance of the program being rolled out. But some of the things that at least that we talked about, the chair and I talked about, is that maybe any kind of contribution from the county would be tied directly to a grant that was awarded. Contributions could be on a first come, first served basis, especially if it's a very limited amount of monies. Those funds could match the local town contribution, or it could match a contribution up to a certain amount, or it could just be a certain amount right out of the gate. And so the importance of that is that and I'll speak about that a little bit later in the Wisconsin counties articles, is that the PSC does look at matching funds differently, those applications with matching funds differently than those without matching funds. So, it also puts us in place, broadband is not going away. There are going to be more programs. There's going to be more monies available. And if the county had a broadband program, we would be shovel ready for some of those dollars, either at the federal or state level, if they were to show up. And historically, towns have put up, around $5,000 just so that you know about what they have been putting towards that. And so if there was a budget, maybe in $5,000 increments may be something to consider. Now, I talked about, well, the other thing that I included with your packet was just, there have been two legislative agendas where broadband has been on there, and Chairman Anderson spoke at both of those. And I gave you, they're both very similar presentations that the chair gave. You have the very first one that came out. And I just wanted you to understand one piece of it. It's all really good, but there's one piece in there in particular, because broadband does have an impact socially and economically. And so if you have that document, it's in about the middle, the last sentence in the second paragraph. And it says, in fact, studies indicate that lacking broadband service now limits growth and reduces property values in rural areas. Businesses in the county that are without good internet are considering moving elsewhere, and homes without internet service are selling for substantially less than comparable homes with it. And then a case in point is Bob Rosendahl, a local businessman who's been working in the county since 2005. And he shared with us two similar projects that he has, and one that has internet service and one that does not. And he said that just recently, in the last couple of years, that one of the first things out of people's mouths when they go to rent from is who is your internet service provider? And when he says that the one property that it doesn't have any, they're no longer interested. He's had to go to a subsidy to help offset people maybe going and getting satellite service, or maybe just reducing their rent. So it has been having an economic impact. And then just recently in the recent Wisconsin Counties magazine, and I think the chair sent you at least a notice of that. I think all of you get that magazine. I can make it available. Scan the piece that's in there if you don't have it, and send it off to you. But what I'd like to do is maybe just go through it and highlight some of the pieces, because there are also things that we spoke about in the information, the packet that you guys received. So there's several articles, and one of the first one is broadband and COVID-19 in Wisconsin. And I'm just going to read a couple highlighted areas of each of these sections, and then I will take some questions. But you can always break in if you have a question. I can certainly find my place, and so you don't have to wait for me to stop if you have a question. But according to the FCC, 2020 broadband deployment reports that 7.1% of Wisconsin residents lack access to at least one broadband service with a speed of 25 up and 3 down, or better, compared to the national average of 5.6. So, Wisconsin is much higher. These numbers are even worse in the rural areas of Wisconsin, where 26.7% of people lack access to at least one broadband service. And we know that to be true in Dunn County, because we did that report, and that's where we identified the donut. So that kind of confirms at least what we have found. Broadband infrastructure is an essential catalyst to drive community, public safety, learning, health, and economic goals across the state of Wisconsin. And back when there was the stay-at-home order in Wisconsin, that meant that many residents shifted to working from home. Schools closed, and distance learning became the new norm, and telemedicine became more critical than ever. The pandemic underscored that internet connectivity is essential for daily life. And this whole article is really about broadband, but it's really focused on what we've learned as a result of the pandemic. And so going on into the article about broadband expansion grants, and we alluded to this or spoke about it in the handout to you, but this article kind of more clearly describes it. And so it's the second paragraph in that article. It says that the PSC prioritizes grant applications for projects that include matching funds, a public-private partnership, have an impact on areas with no broadband service providers, are scalable, promote economic development, will not delay the deployment of broadband in neighboring areas, and or projects that impact a large geographic or sizable number of underserved people in the community. So I just wanted to call your attention to this, that they do prioritize these grants based off of that criteria, and one of that is matching funds, and that's on your agenda for later discussion. More now than ever, reliable high-speed internet is critical for all areas of Wisconsin. Going on to the next article where it talks about disparate access. The very first piece of that article talks about in 2010, the authors of Connecting America, the National Broadband Plan, they wrote, and this is nothing that new. I think we all know this, but they wrote that broadband is the great infrastructure challenge of the early 21st century. Like electricity a century ago, broadband is a foundation for economic growth, job creation, global competitiveness, and a better way of life. But broadband in America is not all it needs to be. Approximately 100 million Americans do not have broadband at home. It goes on, in their article to talk about that COVID-19 and related stay-at-home orders forced a large number of employees to work from home, interacting with coworkers and business associates via meetings, software, and requires reliable broadband. It's impacted the county. Here we are with needing broadband in order to just have these meetings. Many workers, and it goes on to say that many workers and students who live in areas without reliable broadband access were at a significant disadvantage, and we know that to be true in Dunn County. On that same page, there's a map of Dunn County, or of the state, and it says percent of population without access to 25 megabytes per second broadband. And Dunn County is colored kind of a tan or a brown, and that's 20 to 29%, almost 30% of Dunn County is without what is considered reliable or the speeds for broadband access. Statewide, 10% of children under 18 did not have broadband in the home. Let's see. COVID-19 pandemic and accompanying economic and education disruptions raise an important question. Are we moving fast enough in our efforts to make affordable broadband everywhere? And I think the pandemic really, I thought about this a lot, and this county's magazine was very timely for this discussion. But I've thought quite a bit, being on the broadband team, quite a bit about the impacts of COVID to those that were forced to go home. I'm lucky, I'm at the county. We have really good access and didn't lose a day of work. But there are a lot of people that either lost work, couldn't communicate with their doctors unless it was via phone, and simply just trying to keep kids entertained because they don't have broadband access. The last piece just talks about that the COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the need for robust broadband accessibility in Wisconsin's rural areas. Local governments, the state, and industries need to continue to collaborate on resources to create a broadband infrastructure that supports counties in the future. So if you didn't get a chance to read those articles in the Wisconsin counties, contact the chair, and he could contact me, and I could either, again, scan that piece in and send it off to you, or make sure that you can get a copy of it. And the last piece that I want to talk about on broadband forward our certification is that we will be having a press release that'll be going out talking about Dunn County's broadband forward community certification, and so I'll be sending that out to the newspapers very shortly to get that press release going. So with that, I've been working with the team on broadband for 4 years, and it doesn't seem like 4 years have passed, but it really has. It's an important project for me as a county planner, and so the information that I've shared and that the chair has provided you in your packet is all intended to maybe help you guys understand more concretely broadband and the county's efforts and maybe what the county might want to do. And it's more in response to last month's meeting where it was only a discussion. There were no materials that were available, and the committee was struggling just to understand why is it important and where should we go. So at least my hope is that with the information provided, that you have at least some information to ask more questions or to make a decision. And with that, I will turn it back over to the committee.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Very thorough. And before I ask if anybody has questions of Bob, let me add just a little more. Each time that any of these, as Bob referred to them as ISPs, would apply to the Public Service Commission for a grant, we would write a letter of support, meaning when we were telecommuter forward certified and that we thought this was needed in Dunn County. Now we're going to be able to also add broadband forward certification to help. I guess there's 9 or 10 maybe ISPs in Dunn County, and there are 3 grants right now that are ready to be moving 24/7 as 2 of them. And as you know, Bloomer Telephone up in Bloomer is ready to move on north of Colfax. And those got, I think, a great deal of help from us with those letters. Now we think we can even provide more. And then let me just say one thing more, just so you know, in this article, in your last Wisconsin counties, if you go to the broadband expansion grants, it says the application period for the next period of broadband expansion grants will begin September 1st and close on December 20th. Now, I've already talked to some of these ISPs and they're looking at it. Now we can turn around and say, yes, Dunn County we're broadband forward certified. We fully support it, and we hope that more of those grants, in some cases it's loans that they're going to. I think Dave Bartlett up in your area with Mosaic, some of those have been loans rather than grants. Isn't that what you told me, Dave? We don't care if they get loans or grants, if that'll expand broadband with all these areas of Dunn County. That's what we're looking to achieve. Now, committee, Dave Bartlett, Paul Miller, questions that you have of Bob. I guess you did a thorough job, Bob, covering it. Thank you very much. Well, there'll be more on this later because I'm going to be proposing a motion a little later. If you don't have any questions, you'll notice under items for discussion.
Could I
I'm sorry.
Could I ask a question?
Ann, of course. Ann.
I'm just, because I think broadband is so important. Those 645 households that the expansion grants were going to serve, are they in that donut or so if they're in the areas that never had internet?
Yes, a majority of those would be in the donut area, and it wasn't just households; it's also businesses that were served. But yes, a majority of those are in that donut area.
And one other, so as I was reading through the Wisconsin or the counties magazine, do our internet service providers know about this new FCC funding? Because that auction or bidding sounds like it's like there's an application due in 2 days. And that sounds like
Yeah.
that donut area is the main target. So is there a way to get a piece of that federal funding? Because that would be great.
If I understood your question, because yes, the ISPs are very savvy about monies that are available, and there is an auction that is coming up, and I have spoken with several of the ISPs, and they are seriously considering putting in a bid for that. And so yes, they are aware of those things that are out there, and they also rely on the county when they do put in grants, either mainly right now a letter of support, but a lot of the information that we've collected, they are using as justification for their request. And so we did a fairly robust report a couple of years back, and I think that there's a lot of information that's in there that has been used both by the county and by the ISPs. But yeah, they're very savvy about stuff that's available in terms of money out there.
Thank you.
And did that answer? Okay. Anybody else on the committee, or Dave or Paul or anybody else have a question? Bob? Bob, if you hang around, we'll be asking you a little later maybe for the comments if again, but excellent report, Bob. Thank you very much. You've worked hard on this. You do know that
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
that the plans right now are two of them 24/7. One of them is called Pheasants Crossing, just north of Menominee. They applied for that a year ago and didn't get the grant. Now they did get it. And the other one's south of Menominee, kind of in a solar farm area where Down Electric has their solar energy plant, and I understand that's about 6 miles. And as I said, the other one is up north of Colfax. I think it includes, maybe Stan, correct me if I need to be, it's township of Granton, Colfax, and maybe extends up to Sand Creek and pretty well down that area, maybe even south of Colfax a little bit, and that's Bloomer. And they've already applied for some permits, and they're ready to move ahead. So we're looking for a lot more going on. Thank you again, Bob. Good report. You notice that under D of our items at the request of the chair, I put reconsideration of recommendations to include the 2021 broadband funding in the budget. And I'm asking you for that possibility because then under 6, I have some action items. Are there any questions on what I'm asking for here? If not, then we're going to move on to tourism report. And this we haven't done a whole lot on lately. And I've talked to Jim Zons on this. I said, well, Jim, can we resurrect this? And I've talked to Kimberly on it. And I'm glad she's here listening, but we won't be able to hear from her. And then, of course, we have Julie Golvin, who's very involved in the Wisconsin agribusiness. And John, her husband, is the vice president of that. And as Stacy mentioned earlier, they even get publicity or quite a bit on what they're doing here in Dunn County regarding ag tourism. So I asked Jim Zons if he might have some ideas of maybe how we might get this resurrected again with our county, with our Chamber of Commerce Executive Director and our EDC person in our Dunn County Economic Development. We're all a part of promoting Dunn County. So Jim, have you got any update or report for us at this time?
Well, I'm kind of piggybacking on an idea that you had with this idea of having maybe a committee with all these different players that would be interested in rural tourism, and maybe at least having an initial meeting to see what we can discover, or how we can work together, or different ways that it can be promoted with all these different entities, as opposed to everybody doing their own thing. Maybe there's something that can be done with the Community Resources and Tourism Committee kind of spearheading some sort of joint collective action, or at least some sort of idea forming thing. We don't tend to have as much time with this committee to get into it, so maybe it's time to have some sort of subcommittee or separate committee that focuses on rural tourism specifically.
Yeah, I agree, Jim. So where do we go from here?
Well, is it something where we can possibly have at least an initial meeting of people that would have an interest in it to see where we can go collectively? I don't think it's one thing with one person coming up with the ideas. I think it's a collective or group type of thing, working together with coming up with the ideas.
Yeah, Jim, I appreciate that. And with your background in photography and tourism and everything, and with Kimberly here, who's very willing to work with us in tourism, not just within the city and outside and everything. And with us not having to have an Allison Dairyland during this particular year now, which as you know, all got set back 2 years, we will not be focusing anything on this particular year on Allison Dairyland here in Dunn County. So I thought maybe if I could appoint Jim Zons to kind of chair up a meeting along with Stacy, along with Kimberly, and maybe Julie Govan, and it's hard to have a meeting nowadays, but whether it's by email or something to see if there's any interest in where we're going. I'm not asking that we look for money right now, but is there some way we can help? Economic development's doing some things in one area. I'm looking at rural tourism, not just ag tourism, rural tourism, and that includes more than just the agri-tourism. But we've got a lot. Stacy and I are going to visit some of these shortly, some of these places, and Kimberly, I know you're working real hard on it. So I hope that we just don't let this drop. So Jim, if you'll accept this little leadership, I will ask you at our meeting in August if maybe somehow or another you've had a chance to talk to these people and see if we might come up with a plan for, let's say, 2021 and looking at something we can do. Are you willing to accept that chairmanship, Jim, to kind of lead us in that?
Yeah, I'd be willing to take that on, especially right now where there isn't a lot happening right now, especially with things. So it's a good time to do some planning.
Oh, thank you. We'll let it go at that right now, just to let you know that the CR&T, the T, we want to keep in there. And when we can start doing a little more in our rural tourism in Dunn County, we would certainly like to do that. Thank you, Jim. Now moving on to a couple of action items. I put under consideration of action. Under A, I said recommendation to county board regarding economic development funding. And you remember at our last meeting, we recommended $70,000 to be forwarded it to them. And I've had meetings later with our county manager and with our county board chair and a few others, and we need to be able to justify that. If we're going to ask for $70,000, we need to be able to justify it, how it's going to be spent. And let me say this. Last year was pretty difficult when we had a sick economic development executive director all year. Quite frankly, couldn't get the job done. It could not be done by an office secretary. And so it piled up. And when Stacy took office on April 1st, he told me he had over 12,000 email messages unanswered, 12,000. He also went into a place where they needed to upgrade equipment, needed to respond. There was a lot to do right away. And I'm just saying that with that 70,000, now we're paying rent. I'm not asking you to increase it. I'm asking you to be fully supported. So when I go before the executive committee, I need to be able to justify why we have to have that $70,000. And I hope you will reaffirm to me that indeed it needs to be $70,000. I feel very strongly about that to this committee. Anything less will make us backwards. So do you have any comments on that for me? Or I just need to know if you still feel strongly that the $70,000 was the right amount to take forward to executive, because it's got to pass through executive board for committee first. And Paul, if you've got any comments, or Dave Bartlett, Dave's got his hand up. I'd like to hear from you too.
Well, you're asking for justification, and I don't know that the committee can justify where that money is going to be spent. I think the Economic Development Corporation has to tell us what they're budgeting and what they're going to spend that money on, whether it's going to be for trying to bring in new businesses, going to seminars or trade shows, contacting different companies. I don't know. I mean, I'm not that person, so I don't know what they do, but I don't see that the committee can justify the money. I think the Economic Development Corporation has to justify what they're going to spend it on, and then we end up okaying it or not, you know,
Yeah.
giving it. So I guess when you ask us to justify, I just don't think we're qualified.
Yeah, good comment, Dave. Thank you. Paul, how about let's hear from you? We've talked about this before.
Yeah, we have. And in fact, I've spent a little bit of time on this issue in the past few weeks. I will agree with what Chairman Bartlett just said. We've got a bit of a tail wagging the dog situation here. Ideally, each year, the Economic Development Corporation would produce a proposed budget. The Economic Development Corporation, the county is a big player. We're the largest financial donor, but we're not the only members, and the Economic Development Corporation is its own entity. So ideally, that corporation would present a draft budget along with a financial request to the county each year, and the draft budget would be accompanied by a narrative that explains how it's going to be used, where those funds are going to be put, whether it's for rent, whether it's for salaries and benefits, whether it's for equipment, capital improvements, or whether it's for actual activities, whether it's attending a trade show, making cold calls, making site visits to existing businesses to assess where they're at, where their needs are with respect to, say, workforce development, or their plans for future expansion, where there's a possibility for realizing efficiencies of scale if suppliers were to locate in closer proximity, perhaps on some of our vacant industrial lands, things of that nature. Or even if the Economic Development Corporation was to spend time promoting and marketing the various sites that are available for development, working with those existing buildings on expansion. Principally and foremost, economic development should be focused on attracting new businesses, business expansion, and business retention. In my own observation here in the 4 years I've been with the county, we've done a little bit of that, but not nearly enough. So yeah, I agree with Chairman Bartlett. It's very difficult to justify the ask. Last year, we designated $66,000 for support of the Economic Development Corporation, but I do not have their budget in my hands. I don't know how that was allocated. I do know that the unfortunate passing of Eric Turner left the Economic Development Corporation at something of a crossroads, and that a decision needs to be made by that board as to what it wants to do. What I see is in terms of options for the county, I understand the 70,000 that's been asked for, but what I would hope is that the Economic Development Corporation and perhaps the county and the other members that make up the EDC would have a conversation about options. For the county itself, I thought I would just lay out very quickly, these are the options. And I do not endorse some of these, absolutely, but they are options. Number one, the county could drop out of the EDC. That remains a possibility. I don't support that. I think economic development is incredibly important. In fact, I think it's vital. A large part of our operating revenues come from property taxes, and property taxes are dependent on development. And all the other ways that economic development benefits the citizens of Dunn County, we need to be involved. But it is an option. We could drop out simply because we haven't gotten much for the money that we've devoted to date. We could continue with the way it is, allocate a certain amount of money, and leave it up to the EDC how to spend it without a whole lot of oversight. I also don't advocate that position. I think we need more accountability. I think we need a better understanding. This committee and the county needs a better understanding of what's being done with the money that we allocate, especially given that Dunn County is the largest financial donor. We could try to hire a part-time executive director I say we, I mean the Economic Development Corporation could attempt to hire a part-time. That's because, as Chairman Anderson said, we can't afford a full-time. A full-time professional executive director, we can expect, excuse me, to pay $130,000 to $150,000 salaries and benefits. And our donation that we've talked about so far is 70,000, and there's not enough commitment from the other members of the EDC to provide that part of the salary, much less the salary and benefits for the secretary and the overhead cost of the office that they maintain in the city hall. Can we find somebody to be a part-time executive director? I've got to admit, I'm skeptical. We may get lucky and find perhaps a career person who's been in economic development, who's looking at retirement or phasing, stepping back and perhaps working part-time. We would be very fortunate if we found that. I do know through many years of working with economic developers in my career, it isn't something that just anybody can do, nor are we going to be benefited by somebody says, well, I'll figure out the job. However intelligent and motivated they may be, we need a professional in that role who knows the business and knows how to go about helping Dunn County with its economic development. But hiring a part-time executive director, because that's what we could afford, is certainly one of the options. A fourth option is we could encourage the Economic Development Corporation to contract with an economic development firm, a firm that provides economic development services, and contract with a firm rather than hire an individual for what we can get for the money that the Economic Development Corporation has to devote to that purpose. X number of hours on average a week devoted to economic development. We again would have to be very clear in any such contract with the firm as to what the scope of services is and what the deliverables are. But it's something that we haven't done, that Economic Development Corporation has not done in the past, and it is an option and one that may be worth considering. And finally, we have there's the Greater Menominee Development Corporation, which in fact is contracting with a private firm for the provision of economic development services that we could, because Dunn County is a member of the Greater Menominee Development Corporation, we could say we're on board with that and are willing to contribute some funds to expand potentially the scope of services that that firm has already agreed to or is negotiating with Greater Menominee Development Corporation. The drawback on that may be that as it exists right now, the Greater Menominee Development Corporation is interested in Menominee specific and immediately surrounding it, whereas Dunn County's economic development is county-wide. Our members include, for instance, Boyceville, Colfax, and Elk Mound. So we would want to explore under that scenario, the Economic Development Corporation would want to explore whether or not partnering with the Greater Menominee Development Corporation, perhaps using the same firm, would there be any conflict if the scope was expanded to include all of the county in terms of the marketing of the county, the outreach to the existing buildings, the exploration of the opportunities for economies through relocation of businesses that rely on one another, et cetera. So those as I see them are 5 options that the Economic Development Corporation maybe should consider going forward. Which brings us back to today and the request today. The CR&T committee has already made a recommendation of $70,000. As with every other budget a request that comes forward, ultimately the executive committee will review it and the county board will adopt it. We do have time. What I would encourage maybe is most appropriate is no action at this point by the CR&T. Allow the Economic Development Corporation board to meet and discuss what it wants to do and come back with a clear proposal. And then if this committee, or if there's insufficient time, the executive committee, but I think there should be time for both this committee and the executive committee to review that proposal by the EDC and determine whether or not it wants to stick with the recommendation it has already made or change the recommendation or do something else entirely. But I will, on behalf of this committee, if everybody agrees, work with Chairman Anderson as far as that meeting of the EDC and the articulation of its vision for its future that'll allow this committee to make a more informed decision about its recommendation. Sorry for the long-winded nature of this, but as I say,
No.
I've been thinking about it for a while.
Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate those comments, and I will share with you that Stacy and I have been putting together the agenda for the next Dunn County EDC, which is this coming Wednesday. And at that particular meeting, and Stacy and I have been working closely on this and have been talking about this very same thing. And Stacy, if you want to comment on this right now, I think maybe at our meeting next Wednesday, if you would share with our board a little bit about the discussion we had here today, and put together some thoughts, and then after our meeting next Wednesday with Dunn County EDC, I will be able to then formulate, you and I, and bring it back to update the CR&T committee. And then, now, we don't have a county board meeting in August, but we do have an executive meeting in August, right, Paul?
That's correct.
And so if anything that we put together, we will do that. And Dave Bartlett, our county board chair, and to you, Paul, I thank you for this. I think it's what we needed. Stacy, you heard what we were talking about. And so anybody else? Stacy, do you have any comments? Do you think that we can get this done?
Yeah, I sure appreciate everything Paul said there. I think he's spot on with his analysis. I really liked his options, some better than others, but he described what he was possibly in for and whatnot. But I think he's spot on in that there isn't enough money allocated to this position as is. This is a real job. And again, I'm not pulling rank here. I was a CEO for 36 years in a $4+ million business. This is a real job, and your return on investment is going to be there if you get the right person, the kind of person that Paul described, a real economic development person. But in addition to that, kind of taken off on the budgets that I've done before, this is not a difficult, it's a very important budget. But in comparison, that's not going to be difficult to get you something, Mr. Chair, as well as what I've read through in some of my thousands of documents here is past year's business plan. So there's always been work plans, if you will, as to what the Economic Development Corp does with their money. That's also not going to be difficult to put together, and I can go to work on putting something together for 2020. Sounds like that's what you're looking for. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may, not to put too fine a point on it, but really what the CR&T committee should be with respect to EDC is in the same position it is with respect to the libraries. The libraries each year present, basically, they have a plan, they have their budget, they have their plans for the coming year.
Right.
And while it's a little bit different because the amount there's a statutory requirement, it's not unlike what we do with the libraries. They know what they need to do. Their ask is to us, and we step in and meet our statutory requirement, but it's also based on their budgets. We used to also have other organizations that came to us, and in every case that I can remember, although those have been reduced as our finances have gotten tighter, in every case that I can remember, they came to this committee and said, here's our plan, here's our budget, this is our ask. That's what we need from the EDC. Here's our plan, here's our budget, here's the ask.
I totally agree. This is why now I've just been president of Dunn County EDC since January, and you can see what kind of a mess I got into. I'm sorry. No, I'm not blaming anybody. And then it took a while to turn around, and then I'm lucky to get Stacy to come on board here as an interim. We'll get that together for me, won't we, Stacy? And at our next meeting Wednesday, this will be discussed. And you're absolutely right. We'll get it together, and we will provide that for you. And so that, and when you put together the executive agenda for our last part in July, I'm hoping at that time I will have a chance then to justify and bring that plan to you, Paul and Dave, if that meets with your acceptance. Will that work?
That's great.
Thank you. Well, thank everybody. I think I needed to get clarification on you talking about this and where we're at. And I'm clear on that now. Just one item left on our agenda. And I'm going to take the liberty as your chairman. Under the last item of action, which says reconsideration of recommendation to include the 2021 broadband funding in the 21 budget. And I have a motion. And I'd like to move to adopt the broadband expansion plan that requests $15,000 in the 2021 budget for broadband funding. Shall I repeat my motion? To move to adopt the broadband expansion program and request $15,000 in the 2021 budget broadband funding. Now I need a second or it's dead.
I'll second it.
Who?
Jim Johns.
Jim's on, so moved and seconded. Now we can discuss the motion. Anybody?
I think it's worth at least requesting it. I mean, there's no guarantee, obviously, that the executive committee will sign off on it, but it's worth at least attempting to get it.
Jim, this
Thank
is Tom Quinn.
Tom Quinn.
I can support this, but I think it's in some ways has the same feel to it as a previous question, in that I'm not sure. It would be good, it would be best if we were going to go to the executive committee with a pretty clear idea of what our strategy is, how we intend to spend the money. And I'm a little confused. Is it targeted at matching grants for broadband expansion funding, or is it for other purposes?
Tom, if I might say, I thought it was pretty well included in here of summary and conclusions, if you looked at it. And we can't be more precise than that, I don't think, except it gives us 3 different areas of what we would come up with. If we need to be more definite, I guess we could be. You could amend it. You could amend it.
I thought you had, as long as the motion includes those, that's fine.
Well, no. Maybe there are others that have questions on it. Let's hear them. Thank you, Tom. Ann or Dave?
I guess, Jim, you said your motion was a broadband expansion plan. I think you should call it the broadband expansion program then, like is in this summary and conclusion. I was wondering kind of what Tom asked, if you meant what was in the summary and conclusion or not.
Okay.
And so I think you should call it that. I understand what you're asking for there. So I guess I understand it.
I appreciate those comments from Tom and Dave. I guess I was trying to make the motion kind of simple and then referring back to what was here in my summary and conclusion. Now, otherwise I thought the motion would get kind of long, you know, but what would you recommend as amendment then, either Tom or Dave, to clarify and make you more comfortable with that motion?
I don't have it in front of me right now, Jim, but Dave is suggesting that you referred to those 3 points as the plan.
Right.
So maybe you should just include the funding for the 3-point plan. And you could even include those points if you wanted to.
Actually, it was 4 bullet points rather than 3. I'll stand corrected, but they are all in there. And if you wanted to amend the motion, Tom or Dave, to say that which would be included under these plan.
If it's okay, Jim, I would offer an amendment without having it in front of me. I'm sorry. An amendment to recommend $15,000 to fund towards funding of the broadband plan, which includes those 4 points.
Michelle, are you able to get that motion down, that amendment maybe for us at this point, Michelle?
This is Anne, and I think one of the issues was instead of plan, it was a program in the documents. So it was amending it from plan to program. So the broadband expansion
Yeah.
program.
Hey, you should call it broadband expansion program, so it's all called the same.
I think that was my motion, wasn't it, to move to adopt the broadband expansion program?
No, you said plan.
Oh, program is what I got written down. I'm sorry.
You said plan, and
Good
that's
point.
what threw me off.
Oh, no, I meant program. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's, the motion was meant to be program, not plan. I thought
Correct.
that's what I said. I
Okay.
stand corrected. Michelle, if you'll make sure that that is program, not plan. Thank you, Dave.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
anybody else?
point of order.
Yes.
You've got a motion that's been made for an amendment that you need a second to.
I know it.
Before you
Right now,
consider
there's
your,
amendment before the
before you
floor.
continue your discussion.
Amendment, there's a, it was moved to amend the motion, right?
Basically, to add those 4 points to.
I know it. Now I need a second to the amendment. Anybody
I'll
second the
second that.
amendment? It's seconded by Bartlett. Okay. Now let's vote on the amendment if you're clear. Now, Michelle, will you read back the amendment? And I think I've got it right, but to make sure we get it right in the minutes, the amended to the motion, amendment.
Okay, if I have this right, so the recommended amendment is recommend 15,000 towards the funding of the broadband expansion program, which includes the 4 bullet points. Would you like me to read those 4 bullet points?
I would be happy to read them if you want me to.
I have them here.
There,
So it's the
I
4
don't think she needs to read them. We have them
Okay.
right here.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll second. Oh, no, we had a second.
We
Right?
have a second.
Okay.
We're having discussion on the amendment right now. They include the 4 bullet points that are in this. And I'm not sure whether you wanted them read again or you all have it in front of you enough that you can read it. I would be happy to read those 4 bullet points if you want. Yes? Okay, here they are, the 4 bullet points. All contributions are tied to only awarded grant proposals. Second bullet point, contributions are on a first come, first served basis. Third bullet point, county funds could match the local town contributions or match the town contributions up to a certain amount. Or last bullet point, provide a maximum contribution amount right out of the gate. Now, we're asking for 15,000 in the first motion. Remember, first come first, we can decide that later. We don't even know if we've got the money. That's why I wasn't more specific. Are you okay with that amendment now? All ready to vote on the amendment? The bullet points, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now the motion as amended, we will vote on. The motion now is to move to adopt the Broadband Expansion Program. And Michelle, following what? The guideline, how did it read, Michelle?
Okay, so moves to adopt the broadband expansion program, recommending $15,000 in the 2021 budget towards the funding of those following 4 bullet points.
Of those bullet points. Well, is that clear enough to everybody? No, yes? Are you ready to vote on the motion now as amended? All ready to vote? 15,000, okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. That will be forwarded now to our executive committee. Michelle, thank you for helping me get that amendment and all that straight. You know, this has been a pleasure, and we've come to the end of our meeting. We've taken care of all business. I will say to you that our next meeting is August 10th. At that time, from the directive I just got from our county board chair and county manager, we will be looking at our legislative agenda. So I want all of you to be thinking about what issues. Now, last year we had broadband as the big executive issue that we brought back for executive. And the executive committee will be looking at this, so we can, that'll be in time, Paul, for our August 10th meeting, right? So thank you. Be thinking about that and be ready at August 10th, which is our next meeting. And finally, now I open it up for announcements from any members of the committee here that you care to make. And certainly to you, Paul, and to Dave, and to Stacy, any announcements or anything. And sorry, Kimberly, I can't call on you, but if there are announcements you want to make and everything, call Stacy or me and we'll be happy to work with you on it. Glad you're aboard. Announcements.
Jim, I don't have an announcement really, but just Stacy mentioned the last meeting of the Regional Planning Commission, which I'm one of the Dunn County representatives on. And Lynn Nelson at that meeting let us know that they are going to put a significant amount of effort into applying for a bunch of new federal money that's becoming available for broadband expansion. And I think one of the things that they're looking at would be trying to develop some kind of technical assistance to develop a regional strategy for doing that, which would, I think, complement our local plans very much. Just a notice.
Thank you, Tom. Any other announcements from anybody? Well, before I adjourn, a special thanks and out to Krista for setting this all up for us and relating it. Thank you. And a thank you to Michelle for recording the minutes and everything here today. I appreciate it. And Kimberly, for you being on, and to our county manager and county board chairman. We're always glad when you're a part of this committee meeting. I think we got a lot accomplished, and thank you to you, Stacy, and to everybody else. And it's 6:01. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.